Yo, what up? How's it going? And welcome back for another video. Today's video will be doing a guide for JARVAN IV in Season 10. So this guide is going to be designed for maybe if you're a beginner to JARVAN, beginner to playing jungle, or maybe you've been playing for a little while but you want to optimize your gameplay on JARVAN for Season 10, then this video will give you all the tools necessary to do just that. So with that out of the way, let's get right into the video. Alright, so before you get into the game or anything like that, the first thing we have to talk about is your rune setup. So the runes I have pulled up on the screen is the Conqueror setup. I'm very aware that you can go a more Electrocute setup, and that setup is fine. We're going to briefly touch on it at the end of the rune section. Really honest, if I'm being honest with you, none of the rune setups are really that, they don't feel that great on JARVAN. At least the keystones don't feel that great on JARVAN. There's really just two main setups, the Conqueror setup and the Electrocute setup. Neither of them feel that great, but they both have some credence, but there's really nothing else to take. So we're going to talk about the Conqueror setup, but there's a lot of sub runes that are really good on JARVAN, especially one that's in the domination tree that we'll talk about. So let's just look at these runes. So we have the Conqueror setup right here. Conqueror is going to help a little bit more in your extended trades, and especially more in the late game for your brawling potential. Alternatively, if you took Electrocute, just kind of bolsters your early game, your early game ganks and stuff like that. Just kind of bolsters that a little bit more, but kind of falls off a little bit more in the late game. So this is more just a sustain style, especially if you had to get in brawls with tanks, other fighters, stuff like that. Conqueror just helps a little bit with that, but really with JARVAN, it's really not about the keystones, it's about the sub runes. So after that, we have Triumph. Triumph's just a solid rune overall. Really no reason to take anything else in this tree line right here. Next we have our stacking runes right here. So I have Tenacity chose right here. I'm a big fan of Tenacity on anybody that it makes sense taking Tenacity. So my rule with taking the Tenacity rune is if they have 2 or more hard CC champions, like let's say the enemy has a Morgana and a Malzahar or something like that, then Tenacity is going to be what you want to take on any champion that it makes sense. You do gain a little bit of benefit from taking Alacrity by just, when you get in those 1v1s where you're brawling people a little bit more, you might get an extra auto in, and it helps slightly with your jungle clear, but it's really not that impactful. So Tenacity is going to be largely more impactful than Alacrity will be in most circumstances. But if they have no CC on the enemy team, you can take Alacrity and that's fine. Really no reason to take Bloodline. You can take Bloodline because JARVAN has a lot of passive attack sweep built into the kit. So if you really want to take Bloodline, that's okay too, but Tenacity is going to be your best bet most of the time. After that, we have our bottom set. We're just going to take Coup de Grace. You could take a Last Stand setup. That'd be okay as well. But Coup de Grace, if a champion doesn't really have a rune that they really want to take on that tree, then Coup de Grace is usually the best one to take most of the time. All right, now let's talk about the sub runes that are on the domination tree. These are the ones that are a little bit more important, and that's why we have precision and domination being taken here. Conquer just does a different thing that Electrocute does. There's a reason why we have Precision Tree, and Triumph's just pretty OP, and Tenacity is great. But the real thing that we want to talk about in the Domination Tree is going to be our Relentless Hunter. It's super, super important on early game junglers. If you watched any of my other guides where I've talked about, something like Pantheon or other junglers like that who can get a lot of stuff done really early in the game, or Xin Zhao, Relentless Hunter is going to help so much with that. JARVAN is a really unique champion that I'm going to talk a little bit more later in the video. He's really unique that he's a level 2 jungler. He's really powerful in the early game, but unlike other early game junglers, he actually has a big place in the late game. He actually serves a big purpose in the late game. He's an amazing team fighter and does a bunch of other stuff, but Relentless Hunter just helps so much with that early game, making sure your early game is popping off a little bit, that JARVAN's able to do. And so that's just the best rune on early game junglers, especially when you start getting it stacked up. It starts to feel really nice. The other rune that we have on here is Cheap Shot. Cheap Shot is pretty decent because if you land your combo that you will be landing most of the time, it'll apply. And also, it'll apply whenever you use your W slow as well. It'll apply Cheap Shot. So it's pretty OP, especially in late game fights. You can actually apply it, if you're alive for a long time, 4 different times in the same fight. Has a very short cooldown. So it's actually pretty solid in the late game fights and stuff like that. Alternatively, you could take any of the middle tree line. The middle line of domination runes would be okay as well if you wanted to. Zombie Ward is really good if you're a little bit higher EWO and stuff like that. But if you're watching this video, I don't imagine you're super high EWO where that's going to be great. But Zombie Ward's always great for junglers if you're doing a lot of sweeping and stuff like that. Or you can take Sudden Impact is fine as well, especially if you're going that damage JARVAN build that's not very good, that we're going to talk about in a minute. Don't build damage JARVAN. We'll talk more about that in a minute though. And then our stat runes right here, we're going to have the attack speed runes. The attack speed rune is pretty standard on all junglers. The adaptive damage and our armor. Again, if you want to, you can take the MR rune right there. If there's 4 AP or 3 AP on the enemy team, you can. It's going to make your first clear a little bit less healthy. But if they just have a lot going on in the AP department, then you can take that MR rune there if you'd like. Now we're going to talk about the Electrocute Runes. The only reason why you'd want to take that, I'm not going to flash a picture up there because we're only going to briefly talk about it. The important thing about taking if you're going to take the Electrocute Runes, then you still want to have the Cheap Shot. I really recommend Cheap Shot, but if you don't want to take that, you don't have to. But just making sure you have a Relentless Hunter in your kit. You really don't need anything else. And then kind of just take whatever you want on the other trees. Secondary, you can honestly take whatever you want. If you want to take more movement speed stuff and take the Sorcery tree in your secondary, or maybe you just want Tenacity in your build because you're going against a lot of TC-like people, then you can take some Tenacity runes from your Precision tree or your Resolve tree would be fine as well. Probably Precision tree is a little bit better, so you can take Conquer. Or not Conquer, so you can take Triumph, be a little bit better. But the reason why you would maybe want to take the Electrocute setup is it helps a little bit with your early game ganks. So that extra little bit of burst damage on your early game ganks sometimes can be very nice. And so if you want to take the Electrocute setup, that's perfectly fine. Conquer is just a little bit nicer for extended trades and a little bit better in the late game when you're going to be itemizing more tank items. Just helps you sustain a level a little bit longer. Neither of them are amazing, so taking either one is perfectly fine. Just Electrocute kind of bolsters your early game, and then the Conquer setup just makes it a little bit better in extended trades and late game fights, stuff like that. All right, here we are at items. So let's talk about your item build. So core items to JARVAN IV is going to be taking the Warrior Enchantment. So you can either take Blue Smite or Red Smite. Red Smite is usually most efficient on JARVAN, but if you're missing your combo a lot, Blue Smite can be helpful with that because it's really nice to get your W slow, but then you can reapply slow if your combo's down, so you can just keep whacking at people a little bit longer, get a couple extra auto attacks. So Blue Smite is fine. But if there's a lot of fighters on the enemy team and you think you might get involved in a lot of skirmishes, then Red Smite's going to be your best bet. Red Smite's just super OP, and you really don't need Blue Smite because you have so much catch on JARVAN. But if you want to take Blue Smite, it's fine. And Red Smite is just a little bit better, I think. So either one is going to be fine, but Warrior Enchantment's going to be your bread and butter. We'll talk a little bit more about taking Cinderhulk later in the video. But really the big difference, the reason why you want to take Warrior, is JARVAN does a weird thing as a champion where he's very powerful at the very beginning of the game. And then if you take the Cinderhulk setup, he falls off being very powerful very early in the game. And then it takes a while for that to catch back up to where the tankiness actually matters from that item build. So JARVAN goes through this cycle where he's very powerful very early in the game because he's just can be all over the map. His clear is pretty solid. He's great in 2v2s, all that good stuff. He can get around the map, make stuff happen. When you take Cinderhulk, by the time jungle items are completed, you already cut off JARVAN being strong. And you have to kind of wait until you have a couple more items for him to be, and for the game to kind of shift into the team fighting phase for you to be good again. And so what Warrior does is it kind of extends that part of the game where JARVAN is kind of powerful in 1v1s, 2v2s, that type of stuff. So taking that Warrior Enchantment just kind of extends that a little bit longer. And then when you get your Black Cleaver, you can still fight people and it feels really nice. And then the itemization just kind of works out really nice that by the time you get to the team fights, you already have the tankiness from your other items. You didn't really need to build your Cinderhulk in the first place. So that's why Warrior Enchantment is best on JARVAN most of the time. You can go Cinderhulk and it's fine. It's perfectly fine, especially if you're behind and you just want to play for team fights and your ganks aren't really working out. You just want to be a big beefy boy. That's fine too, but Warrior Enchantment just a little bit better at extending that early part of the game where JARVAN's very strong. And grabbing that Cinderhulk doesn't really boost your late game all that much more than Warrior would in the first place. Also, that early cooldown reduction early in the game after you have your Black Cleaver finish, and now you're going to have 30% cooldown reduction, feels very nice. Feels much nicer than 20%. That's why it's right here. All right, now let's talk about Black Cleaver. So we have Black Cleaver right here. Black Cleaver is JARVAN's best item by far. He has a lot of synergies with it, with the Armor Shred, because he has Armor Shred already built into JARVAN's kit. So it just synergizes really well with that. The cooldown reduction is nice. Once you have 40% cooldown reduction, you can actually activate Q on the same flag to where you can get in and get out. Not really applicable that you're going to do that all the time, but the cooldown reduction does feel very, very, very nice to get a lot of W's off, a lot of Q's off in fights. And then the armor shred and the chase down potential if you miss your combo, especially with the phage passive, feels very nice. So that's why it's right here. The only time you wouldn't build this item is if you're insanely far behind and you just need tank items. You just need like an early, an early stone plate or GA or something like that, just to find some usefulness. But the only time you wouldn't want to build it, or if you're gonna go that silly full damage Jarvan build that I'll talk about at the later when we get to situational items. If you wanted to go the full damage build, then you wouldn't build this item. But we'll talk about that build whenever we get to it. All right, for boots, we're going to take defensive boot setup. You can do some weird things with Mobies really early in the game if you really wanted to, but it's probably just best not to do that, especially if you're new to playing jungle or new to playing Jarvan. I wouldn't advise going Moby boots on this champion, or you will feel very, very weak unless you're snowballing very hard. And you already have so much maneuverability with your Relentless Hunter and stuff like that, so I don't advise taking that. So we have the armor boots. They have a lot of AD, take that. They have a lot of CC, take Merc Treads. It's pretty simple. Both of those boot options are really solid. All right, let's talk about some solid item choices. So we have our GAs, the first item right here. So Jarvan has a get in tool, but a lot of times he can't get out. And this just helps out a lot with your stall out. So essentially, the play pattern for Jarvan, and we're going to talk more about this, but the play pattern for Jarvan is you're really powerful in the early game, and then you're a pretty solid team fighter, but there's this weird section where you're still like a damage champion, and you're transitioning to being more of a tank champion. And GA is just a really good bridging tool for that, as well as even if you build this way later in the build, whenever you already have tank set up, it just makes so much stall out time for Jarvan. And that's what Jarvan's really successful at in the first place, is stalling out people. Because a lot of times you'll get some huge engages on enemies and you'll have their whole team in there and your team collapses on it and murders them and it's awesome. But a lot of other times your team will get engaged and you just engage on top of their carries and you just buy time. And GA does a lot to to elongate that time that you can stall out the enemy. And it makes it a little bit better, makes you a better stall champion than whoever's jumping on top of your team. So it just helps you stall out, kind of helps you bridge from being a damage champion into a tank champion. It kind of helps you get to that spot, and it's a pretty cheap item, so it's really nice. We have a stone plate right here. So you don't always have to build stone plate, but stone plate can be something you build early in the build, rather than a GA, or you can build it after GA or really late in the build. It's a super cheap item. And Jarvan, after the early game, you are a team fighter for the most part. You hardly ever do anything in the side lanes or anything like that. You're mainly just a big boy team fighter who stalls out fights and deals a lot of damage to backline carries. With just the innate damage built into Jarvan's kit. Stone plate helps out with that a lot. Another thing about Jarvan is a lot of his damage is really front loaded. If you don't know what that means, it's just he does a lot of upfront damage, but not much after that. So like I do EQ ultimate, and then now my Q is on a 5-second cooldown, my E is on a 10-second cooldown, and my ultimate's on a 85-second cooldown. So you don't have anything left. So a lot of his damage is front loaded, so you can do your full combo, so all your damage is down, and then use stone plate right after that, and you won't really feel because stone plate nerfs your damage. You won't really feel that nerf to your damage because everything's on cooldown anyways. So a lot of his damage is front loaded, so this kind of helps a lot with that, especially if you find yourself team fighting a lot. And by the time you get to this item, you should be team fighting a lot. So it just really helps with your stall out and just helps with a lot of what J4 is supposed to be doing. All right, after that we have Deadman's. Deadman's just a really solid tank item on J4. Really helps you just get into the fights, make sure you get your engage off, and just helps a little bit with your already front-loaded damage. So don't really need to explain that anymore. Sterak's is just a solid damage item that you can build very late into your build, so it just kind of keeps your damage up to where maybe you can 1v1 the carry if you're snowballing pretty hard. You can build this early in your build if you're snowballing. You still want to be have a lot of damage, but you know that you're going to you know that you have to be the tank eventually. This can be another one of those bridging items from damage to tank build that still has a lot of damage built into it. So this can be a really nice item just to add into your build either early on if you're snowballing instead of the GA, because it's a little bit more expensive. That's why I say if you're snowballing, or you can build it way later in the build and build it maybe last item or something like that. Just give you a little bit more damage, a little bit more beefiness, all the good stuff. It's a really nice item on Jarvan. And then we have our adaptive helm, which is just a super solid tank item, especially if there's a lot of AP options on the enemy team, especially if they have champions like Brand, Zyra, Ryze, Cassiopeia, stuff like that. This is going to help out a lot with that, just based off the passive of the item. It's one of the best tank items in the game, and it's super cheap. let's talk about some situational items. So we have Random's Omen. The reason why I have situational items is because Deadman's is your best option most of the time. But if they have double crit on the enemy team, like they have a Yasuo Ashe, then this will be the better item than Deadman's. It's going to suck you don't have the passive from Deadman's, but you're going to have the crit blocker that comes from Random's, so that'll be nice. Another armor item we have on here is Thornmail, so if they have a lot of healing options on the enemy team, for example, if they have a Yasuo with the Conqueror build, it's going to be solid against that. They have something like Mundo and all the good stuff. Fiora, you guys know the deal. Champions that heal, and it's going to be good against them. And you'd build that rather than your Deadman's. We also have Warmogs. Warmogs are just solid on any type of Jarvan build, except for the damage one, obviously. Synergizes super well with Stoneplate, so if you end up going like an early Stoneplate, maybe you're really far behind, and you just need some stall out, you just need some HP, then you can just buy your Stoneplate right after your Black Cleaver, and then buy a Warmogs, and it'll make you super tanky without having to spend a lot of gold, because the synergy with those items are just really solid. You get the resist from Stoneplate, and you get all the health from Warmogs, the highest health item. All right, after this, we have Titanic Hydra. This is really just a snowball item. If you are insanely far ahead, you can build this item, and it's nice. But this is mainly a lane-focused item, so please don't build this item. I see far too many people just build this second item or third item. They're like, bro, I'm going to go Cinderhulk, I'm going to be tanky, I'll get a Black Cleaver, and then I'll go Titanic Hydra. Stop it. It's so expensive. It's decent for your 1v1s, but this is more of a top lane Jarvan item. The reason why it fits fine for a top lane Jarvan item is, one, you have more gold when you're a solo laner, and then two, Tiamat is nice in lane. Like, building it in lane is nice. You don't ever need to have Tiamat when you're clearing the jungle. Jarvan already clears the jungle super fine, and the Tiamat doesn't really help with your jungle ganks all that much. It doesn't make sense to itemize it early. There's some junglers where you can buy Tiamat early in the build, and it makes a lot of sense. But this item doesn't really do anything that Jarvan wants to do. You're not going to be split pushing on jungle Jarvan. You shouldn't be 1v1ing that often after like the mid game. You're a team fighter, and that is your purpose, is mainly as a team fighter. You can go some different builds where you're really damage focused, but if you really want to play a damage champion, I don't know why you're playing Jarvan. Is just kind of the whole idea. So don't build that item, please. Just kind of a tangent. I was playing a game today, and I don't play very much, really, but I was playing a game on Kindred, and I was dumpstering this Jarvan player, and he built the second item, and I was just like, what are you doing? What are you doing building Titanic Hydra second item when you're getting, like, he was getting dumpstered. Like, I was 3 levels up. Like, I have no idea what this dude is doing. He built it second item. Anyways, it's crazy. Okay, and then we also have, we have Ghostblade here. I'm just using Ghostblade as a representation of the entire damage build for Jarvan. You'd build all the lethality items, all that good stuff. You can get some like fun one-shot, cool plays and all that good stuff, but it's so easy to mess that up. It's so easy to mess up damage Jarvan, because a lot of times you use your damage combo to get in range. A lot of times you use your EQ to get in range for your ultimate. And if you do that, you have no damage left. You just have the damage from your passive, which is nice. But that build is just bad, man. It's just bad. It's just bad. It's a cheap build. So, I mean, if you're like a really styling Jarvan player, then it's fine. And it's really fun. When you one-shot somebody with your ultimate, it's really fun. But it's not a good build. It's really not. It's really not. If you want to play damage champion, just play Blue Cane or Kha'Zix. Just play those champions if you want to build lethality. Stop building on Jarvan. Quit it. Okay, cool. So let's talk about our... we have our full build over here. So our full build is going to be our Red Smite Warrior Enchantment. This is just an example of a full build, by the way. You can switch out a lot of these items. A lot of the items you build on Jarvan is going to be highly situational, because they're mainly tank items. So they're highly situational, and you can really build them in any order you want. What really is the core build is going to be your Warrior Enchantment, your boots, whatever boots make sense for the game. Black Cleaver and GA are going to be items you want to build almost every single game. If you're really far behind, you can kind of do some different stuff. And then after that, you can kind of fill it in with the tank items that make sense. I'm a big fan of Stoneplate because how cheap it is. I just love how cheap that item is. This build does kind of lacking a little bit of resist, but it makes up with it in the Stoneplate and the stall out you're going to have with that. But if they had a lot of AP on the enemy teams, then you wouldn't build Sterak's in this build. You'd build like an Adaptive Helm or something like that would be fine in the build. So you can just switch out tank items where you want to on the full example build, but this is just an example right here of what your full build could look like. This is very cheap, has a lot of front-loaded damage, and then rounds out with tankiness at the end for what you want to be doing on Jarvan. Let's talk about Jarvan's abilities. So I'm gonna go through these pretty quickly. So Jarvan's passive. Jarvan's passive is super satisfying to use. I love playing lane Jarvan because it's so satisfying to CS. So essentially, your first auto on an enemy is going to do 8% of their current health. On top of your auto attack, and then it refreshes after a couple seconds. It does apply on minions, monsters, and champions, so it's pretty nice just for a little bit extra damage. It's really satisfying to see Jarvan just whack the thing. It's pretty nice. Your Q is a line skill shot that you'll throw in front of you, and it does it also does armor shred, and it goes up based on how many points you put into it. This is your highest damaging ability other than your ultimate. All right, and then we have our W. Our W is a slow and a shield. So it's a shield that goes around Jarvan, and then it explodes in a very short area around Jarvan. You'll see it. You can look at the indicator on your champion, and it'll push out to the sides, slowing an enemy. It gains in slow percentage and base shield value by points that you put into it. It does scale with HP, but it's really minimal. So it's it's not a whole lot. Like you can go like a full HP build and only give you like additional like 60 to 80 or something like that. It's not really the health scaling isn't really that important. The base stats are really nice on it, which is really nice. On your E is what you do when you drop your flag. So it's dropping your flag. It gives you passive attack speed, which is going to increase your clear speed in the jungle. It's the ability that you take first, but not the ability that you max. And then also, whenever the flag's on the ground, it'll give additional attack speed to anybody, you and your allies around the flag. It does scale when you put points into it. It does give additional attack speed, but it's very minimal. It's like 2.5%. Every time you put a level into it, it adds to your passive attack speed, and it adds to your attack speed to all of your allies. And it does add to the damage, but the damage is pretty non-consequential. If you look at the ability, it looks like a lot of damage, but a lot of times you're not even hitting people with that ability. A lot of times you're putting it behind them and dragging to it, or you're using it to just get in range. So that's why it's not the ability that you max. It's usually the ability that you max last, because the base value on your shield and the slow is more valuable than that is. Okay, and then your ultimate is when you jump on the ground, make that big arena around you. It's the big team fighting tool. It also does damage to anybody in that area. So whenever you ult, you have to actually click on a champion. You can't just click on the ground. You have to click on an enemy champion. It'll jump on top of them, and anybody caught in that circle will have damage applied to them. Something that's very important to know is if you ult on top of them and an enemy flashes as you ult them, they will flash outside of your arena that you make, and they will also not take damage if they time the flash correctly. This will create a little arena for 3.5 seconds, and you can also cancel it at any time during that duration. So if you cast that ultimate and it's kind of separating you from your team, or it's just messing up your team play, you can cancel it at any time, and it's pretty nice. Also, you can flash outside of it, and the arena will stay up. So a lot of times, maybe your combo will be to combo in, drop your ultimate, and then jump out of it. Cool. All right, your ability that you're going to max first is going to be your Q, and then going to be your W, and then your E. You could necessarily max your E if you wanted to, if you don't want to max the W, but the W is just give you a lot more value. The base value on the shield is pretty high, and the slow is really nice onto it, especially if you miss your combo and you just slow somebody with your W. It gives you a lot more utility than if you did your E and you just had extra attack speed. The W is just worth a little bit more, but your Q is going to be your max. It's your highest damaging ability. All right, now let us talk about your jungle clear. Let's talk about your jungle clear. So when playing Jarvan in Season 10, you can do a lot of different jungle clears, and it's fine. Something important to know is Jarvan is one of the few champions that can do a level 2 gank. So if you want to do a level 2 gank, the only way that you should be doing it, especially if you're new, is at mid lane. If you do it in any of your side lanes, you're very vulnerable to getting punished. There are situations where you can gank the side lane early, but it's just a low percentage play, and you can get punished really heavily, especially if you're not very accustomed to the jungle. That's why we're not going to talk about it too much. But you can level 2 gank mid, and here are the circumstances you level 2 gank mid. First off, you need to take your red buff. You will take your red buff level 1, and you can level 2 gank mid if your mid laner has really good gank assist and the enemy cannot escape at level 1. So meaning like you have something like a Galio versus like a Yasuo, and you've pre-communicated to your Galio that you want to do this play, so they'll take their taunt level 1. And then you can just go, he taunts, you do your combo, and you kill him. Boom, boom, boom. You win the game. That would be a situation where you want to do that. And then if you did that, you'd gank the mid lane, and then you'd wrap around and you'd go into your blue buff and your Gromp, and you'd be level 3. And that's a way you can do a level 2 gank. Outside of those circumstances, there are very minimal other types of circumstances where it makes sense to do level 2 ganking in this meta right now. But if you want to level 2 gank, first off, you got to make sure you do your red buff. You got to make sure you communicate it with your mid laner that you want to do it, and you got to make sure your mid laner has the ability to help you in that. You don't just want to blindly go for level 2 ganks every single game. All right, if you don't do a level 2 gank, you'll take your red buff, and then there's a couple different queries. You could just do a full red side queer. It's fine. It's a little bit suboptimal, but that's fine if you wanted to do that. You could also do a red buff and do full blue side jungle queer. And then by the time you're done with that, you'll be able to do a gank before the Scuttle Crab spawns, and you'll end up on top side. But the quickest way to level 3, if that's what you want to do, and the healthiest queer, is just going to be red buff, blue buff, Gromp. And you can do those 3 camps, and you start making plays happen right after that. So the big thing about J4 is he's so powerful in the early game. You want to be making plays happen, but you do want to be farming at the same time. But you do have a big advantage at ganking super early in the game, and your jungle queer is pretty solid. Even though you're a ganking jungler. So you do want to be making sure things are happening. But those are some pretty basic jungle queries. You can do red full blue side jungle queer or red blue Gromp. Get a couple ganks off, gank top, gank mid, and then do fight for a Scuttle Crab, stuff like that. Then that can be pretty nice right there. All right, let's talk about playing Jarvan after the early game. So I already talked about the build, the way you want to transition. You really transition to a team fighting champion. So after the early game, you are a team fighting champion. Jarvan has a lot of tools built into his kit with his EQ combo into an ultimate. He has so much stall out and fight. So I already talked about this a lot, but essentially you want to be either the primary engage for your team. If that's your role, like you are the engage for the team, then you do great at that thing. Or you can be a secondary engage, or you can be a stall out champion. So let's say your team gets engaged on, then what you can do is you can ult on top of the enemy team so they can't follow up on the engage. And so you can stall at the enemy. And that's why the item build that I talked about earlier, like with the GA, with the stone plate, is really important, because a lot of times you're either primary engaging and stalling out for time because all of your damage is front loaded, right? Or you're just holding the enemy team off while your team kills their engagers and you can stall it for time. So Jarvan is an amazing team fighter. So even if you're behind, getting the stall out items, getting the tank items, you just want to play either primary engage or you want to play to stall out the enemy so your team can win the game. All right, now we're going to talk about counter picks. If you watched any of my videos before, counter picks in the jungle are kind of weird because jungle is such a team position. But the standard champions that you can't beat in 1v1s, like champions like Olaf, they're gonna smurf on you in 1v1s, especially after 6 when you can't even ult them anymore. That's gonna be tough. The only way to get away from him is to ult him and then flash out of your own ultimate. And once you guys are at level 6 and stuff like that, so that's gonna feel bad. The standard Kha'Zix post 6, if he has his R evolve, is going to be difficult to fight. Stuff like that. The same stuff that's always difficult to 1v1 is going to be difficult to 1v1. Jarvan is great at skirmishing. Other than that, things that are pretty difficult for Jarvan are going to be champions who have dashes. So your combo is pretty, it's pretty straightforward. It's just you throw down the flag and you jump to it. So people who have dashes, things like Vayne, things like Kindred, things like Lucian are really hard to mess with, especially if they're not able to dodge that part of the ability and they don't even use their dodge, especially something like Lucian, then they can just wait for you to ult them and they just dash out of your ultimates. So champions with dashes can be pretty difficult because you can just straight up miss your entire combo, and even if you miss that and you're like, fine, I'm going to ult you, and they just dash out of your ultimate. Stuff like that feels pretty bad. Things that Jarvan combos super well with is something like a Gnar. Gnar can jump into your ultimate, throw everybody against the wall. Vayne combos super well with Jarvan because you throw it on the wall. Stuff like Annie, you jump on top of them and then they're kind of locked in there with Tibbers in a little death match, kind of doing like a Gohan thing at the end of Dragon Ball Super. You're locking him in the cage and he's like, you're locked in here with me, I'm not locked in with you, that type of thing. I don't know if you watch Dragon Ball. Anyways, that's kind of off topic. But yeah, those will all kind of feel bad right there. Now let's get into some combos. Alright, here we are in game. We're just going to show a couple combos. So the first one I'm going to show you is just a standard EQ combo. So what you're going to do is you're going to drop your flag. You can see the indicator. If you drop it at max range, meaning I just point my furthest on my map, I drop it, and then I Q, it'll always connect. So at max range, it'll still always connect. Just important, if you throw it at max range and you walk backwards, it will not connect anymore. You still have to be close enough, but where your indicator is and where your Q is, if you throw it down at max range of the indicator, you'll still hit it every time. something important to know. All right, yeah. So that's just a simple thing. Is you throw your flag down, you Q to it. Anybody caught in the path of it will take the damage of your Q, and then anybody caught in the path of it will also be knocked up, and anybody at the end of the path will also be knocked up. So simple, just looks like that. Boom. Let me spawn another. Okay, cool. Let me do this. All right, the other simple combo is comboing your EQ and then your ultimate. So you either hit them with the target or you use your EQ as a gap closer. Important thing to know, if you use your EQ as a gap closer, a lot of your damage is gone. So, but this is still really useful in team fights where you're less of a damage threat and more of just like CC and holding people down. So it looks just kind of like this. And you just ult right at the end. You can actually cast your ultimate mid EQ. So like if you end up missing, but you jump right over there, you can actually cast your ultimate mid EQ, and then you can cancel it at the end. The most damage efficient combo would be to EQ them, and if you're close enough, auto, ultimate, and then W right after that. So it looks something like this. Boom. So I EQ'd, knocked them up, and while they're still in the air, I auto attack them, similar to like Yasuo's combo where you can auto them while they're in the air. Ulted, and then I drop my W at the end to slow them and give me my shield since they are now able to attack me, and it'll also slow them and apply my cheap shot and all that good stuff. Cool. All right, so another little trick that you can do, let me just show you like the flash combo. So if you just want to CC people, let's say you're super low in health, but you want to CC people and still get out alive, you can do something like this. And you can just flash out, and they're kind of stuck in there, and you're walking away. Boom. It's pretty nice. Okay, cool. The other thing I'm going to show you, this is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but if you don't land your EQ, you can actually still flash while you're in motion. It's important that you flash while you're in motion, and if you flash on top of somebody, it'll knock them up while you're still in the EQ combo. It's a little bit tricky to land. I even mess it up sometimes, but once you practice it with a little bit, it's not as difficult. So I'm going to throw my EQ at this champion, and I'm going to flash towards these guys, and hopefully I knock them up. So it looks something like this. Boom. You see, I never even hit this guy, but I flashed on top of him. It ended up knocking up this target and knocking up that target. So I'll show it again. Actually, they're a little bit too far away for me to do it, but boom. I knocked them both up because I flashed on top of them. Additionally, if you weren't going to hit anybody, you can do it the same way. So boom. You need to make sure you're still in motion. You can also use it to extend the range of the EQ. That one's a little bit harder to do because you have to time it just right when you get the edge, because you can mess it up and kind of look like a fool and do some stuff like this. Like, I'm going to mess it up on purpose, by the way. Oh, wait. Actually, I still landed it. But, oh, sorry. I got the timing so right now. See, if you do the flash too late. All right. That was, like, super obvious that I did that too late. But if you did it a little bit too late, then it'll look like that. Cool. I'm not going to show like all the places you can jump over walls. You can jump over almost every single wall with your EQ. Something I'm going to talk about is, let's say you're doing the dragon. So I'm sitting over here doing the dragon, and you want to drop your E to damage the dragon. Go ahead and drop it over the pit. When you drop it there, it'll still give you the attack speed, and then you can just jump out. You can do that same thing whenever you're like taking towers. You're sitting over here taking towers, and then you see the enemy show up, and you're like, all right, I'm bouncing out of here. Let's go. That's something simple that you can just do in every single game whenever you're taking objective and you think enemies are going to come by. Just use it as a way that you can get out. Just make sure you don't mess up the range. Cool. Guys, I think that's it. Jarvan's pretty straightforward. There's a couple simple things like the EQ flash. Something important to know about the EQ flash is it will not apply the damage. So since I flashed on top of them in my EQ combo, it doesn't actually apply the Q damage because they never were hit by the Q. They were just hit by Jarvan's body. So it will not actually apply the damage. It'll only apply the knockup. So it's better to hit them with the combo. But if you need to, then go ahead and flash out of the way. All right, guys, I don't want to drag this out too long. So this is going to be the end of the video. I know a lot of you guys have been asking for this one, and I delivered. We're going to be doing some like weekly update videos, but I'm not going to talk about that too much because if you're new to my channel, you don't know anything about that. So anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. I rambled a lot in this video. I'm sorry about that, but I need to end this because if I just keep talking, I'm going to keep talking, and then it's just going to be forever, and then we're going to be stuck here forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.